it got to a point where I had a handful of articles that maybe I started or halfway through or completed that for one reason or another had been turned down by a range of publications that I was collaborating with. And I was just itching to write about them or see written about. So I decided to create my own outlet for them, essentially. And that's how 1,000 Words was born. I remember lying in bed one Sunday morning, thinking about the kind of gap between the reality of my life and the dreams I had for it. And I thought, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to set up my own online magazine. It was born of that DIY spirit, that kind of tendency to want to disrupt certain models, challenge gatekeepers, and think about the internet as a platform in its own right, as a way of how one might kind of explore or exploit the creative possibilities.
Welcome to Subtext and Discourse Art World Podcast, demystifying the industry through interviews with artists, curators, gallerists, collectors, and other contributors to the field. I'm your host, Michael Dooney. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Tim Clark, the founder and editor-in-chief of 1000 Words online photography magazine. He's also one of the artistic directors of the Fotografia festival Fotografia Europea in Reggio Emilia, Italy. Tim shares his story about starting the magazine and the opportunities that has opened up to him over the course of the past 15 years, the various print publications such as the Writer Conversations, Curator Conversations, and the 10-year anniversary print edition of the magazine, as well as the lead up to the official 15th anniversary celebration. A date for this has not yet been made public, so I'd recommend signing up for the 1000 Words mailing list so you know when the Kickstarter campaign is live. This episode was recorded in September 2023, literally days before my wife went into labour with her second child. So like my son, this recording has just passed his first birthday. It's also one of many reasons why this episode wasn't released earlier. However, you can look forward to fortnightly and later weekly episodes of the podcast very soon. But without further ado, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tim Clark. It's weird we've not met in person yet, because we've probably been at so many of the same events around the same people and probably, bumped into each other at the bar and not even known that
That's
you were
right.
were also at the same place.
Maybe it was me who spilt your drink at the bar in Hull that one year. But yeah, in all seriousness, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to meet, albeit virtually. And
I guess we've admired each other's work from afar for a long time.
that's right.
I suppose most people probably know you most famously from 1000 Words magazine. You've been involved with, as I'm discovering, a lot of other projects, exhibitions, festivals. But I thought let's kind of go back to the beginning. And I'm curious to know, what was your entry point into photography before you started 1000 Words?
Sure, yeah, it's a great question. I always like to start at the beginning as well. Just casting my mind back now, quite far, I guess, from 20 plus years ago.
Because when did the magazine started? 2008, didn't it?
2008, that's right, yeah. I had graduated from my BA 4 years prior to that. So yeah, a bit of a backstory. I wasn't one of those people who came to photography through their dad having a dark room or their uncle bestowing a camera upon them as a gift as a kid or anything like that. And culture, as wonderful as my upbringing and family are and my upbringing was, culture wasn't really at the kind of forefront. It's not like we're sitting around the dinner table discussing opera or film or poetry. Yeah. So I came to it my own means, really. Initially, I had planned to train as an architect and made a last minute decision to pivot from that and do an art and design foundation at Falmouth College of Arts, which is a wonderful, formative, super creative year. Trying your hand at all different media, from filmmaking to fashion. And quite quickly, it was photography that really seduced me, it really drew me in. I remember being 18, 19 years old. So this would be, around 2000, just gorging on the material in the library, pulling off books from the shelf, sitting down. I can remember pulling out Nan Golding's A Ballad of Sexual Dependency, and just being struck by the kind of that gritty, subjective aspect, that sort of diaristic mode of image making, and thinking about that balance of experiencing a world, documenting it at the same time, just being fully immersed in that scene. At that time, you kind of age, I tended to romanticize New York of the 70s and 80s. So I remember thinking about that approach to photography, pulling out David Hockney's photographs, which were, amazingly revelatory for me. The joiner technique, these huge composite photos, just an amazing vision and way of seeing the world and constructing a world, as it were, and just really savoring how the process was revealed to us rather than concealed, and thinking about that way of working as something that felt akin to the natural dynamics of vision in a way. It felt more in line with the way we see the world, those kind of clue-seeking, fluctuating glances that make up vision. When I'm looking at you, I don't see a hole, it's the details, right? Your eye skirts around. So I remember, being quite impressed by that approach, that technique. And then, in the same afternoon, pulling off a Gursky book. And it's at the opposite spectrum in many ways, that sense of unreality or the blurred frames of realism in terms of creating these huge composite, large-scale pieces. So I could quite quickly see what a seductive and confounding and baffling medium photography was then, still is, in terms of helping us see and make sense of the world, how it shapes our perception and sense of understanding of the world and the world of other images. So I was really into it in a big way. And that became my different pathways and the remainder of the foundation. From there, I went on to study BA in visual culture in Brighton. The trend at that point in my life was needing to be on the coast in the UK. So that was more of a kind of history of art. But again, you had electives and I always chose photography. So it was always there, always present. But those are my first encounters, really.
So you were kind of studying then the theory of photography, really, weren't you, in visual aesthetics, rather than the practical applications of photography?
Absolutely, yeah. And even during my degree, I remember in the second year, I was quite proactive, quite spirited, a little bit rebellious, took things upon myself, pushed back against the university, modules I didn't like the sound of or the way they're being delivered, kind of a nightmare student, but also, take it upon myself to seek out internship opportunities where they hadn't existed before. So I was in Brighton. I remember going to Borders, which is the now defunct bookshop, amazing place where I would go in and leaf through magazines and just call these mags, asking if they offered internship opportunities, and ended up doing a couple of those in my second year, assisting the editor, ultimately with a view to hopefully getting a piece published, which I did. I remember my first piece in 2003 was Bill Brandt retrospective at the V&A. So that really had a massive impression on me, as you can imagine. And at that point, I did maybe 2 or 3 short-term internships at different mags and galleries. But yeah, very quickly realized that I didn't want to become a photographer, didn't want to contribute to the kind of massive images that already exist. And I had a more analytical and critical eye and ended up on the editorial side of things, namely writing, quite quickly. That was where I felt I wanted to be.
So did you work for a few magazines then? Because hearing this more about you now, it makes sense, definitely, the path that you've gone down and how you would come to founding the online magazine. But did you work for any print publications or anything before that?
No job, just internships, quick turnaround internships, which I really enjoyed, got a lot from. Traveling up to London, just being exposed to that kind of scene, that wealth of creative activity that's really makes its mark on you as a young person. So no jobs, just a lot of writing. I moved abroad after studying to Spain, in fact.
Oh, cool. Okay. Where did you go?
In Barcelona. I ended up staying there for 4 years. And even at that time, it was a combination of teaching English as a foreign language, just to cover the bills and exist abroad without being a tourist. But it was really just to free up time to focus on writing, really. So for a handful of different photography and art publications. And that was great, I guess, helping find one's voice. But it came to a point, I was working freelance for a magazine there in English as a kind of contributing art critic, covering exhibitions, doing interviews, exhibitions that would come through the city. But it got to a point where I had a handful of articles that maybe I started or halfway through or completed that for one reason or another had been turned down by a range of publications that I was collaborating with. And I was just itching to write about them or see written about. So I decided to create my own outlet for them, essentially. And that's how 1,000 Words was born. I remember lying in bed one Sunday morning, thinking about the kind of gap between the reality of my life and the dreams I had for it. And I thought, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to set up my own online magazine. It was born of that DIY spirit, that kind of tendency to want to disrupt certain models, challenge gatekeepers, and think about the internet as a platform in its own right, as a way of how one might kind of explore or exploit the creative possibilities of the internet. And at that time, this was around 2007, I was speaking with an artist designer there in Barcelona, who then moved to Berlin. He did the design, the art direction, built the site for us on Flash. For us ins, bear in mind, the iPhone didn't exist then. It wasn't out. This was pre-Instagram, pre-iPhone. So we had to live with that site. It was very well done, very sexy, but it's built on Flash, and people couldn't access it on their phones. So it wasn't until further down the line we had a revamp and made it more fit for purpose. But anyway, I guess at that point of its conception, there were print magazines that perhaps had quite clunky websites, blogging that was huge, particularly in the States.
Yeah, really, in like the 2000s. Like I remember myself, like that was kind of one of the ways of accessing a lot of, like, let's say, alternative voices or different approaches to photography.
There you go. That was it, precisely. And I was looking to the States, who were kind of leading the charge on that front. And I found that really dynamic. But there were very few, if not any, online magazines. So I just saw that opportunity, really.
Because yours really does take more of a magazine format, doesn't it? Like the way a lot of other online stuff is, it's every day, every couple of days. Yours, it's every quarter, isn't it?
I mean, it's a good question. Initially, that's how it started. It had that frequency. It was released on a quarterly basis, a batch of articles, comprising reviews, interviews, essays that would be released every couple of months. But in the last few years since the pandemic, it's the general, every month there's one or two articles going online. But yeah, I guess at that point, my thinking was, I was reading about the slow web movement. So not pumping out loads of content, not linking to other content. It was newly commissioned writing, encouraging readers and viewers to slow down, take their time, savor what they're engaging with, because it takes time, energy, labor, resources, love to produce this stuff. And that's something else I guess I should add. It was not just one authorial voice, whereas these blogging, it was one person's perspective, which is great. But I was very keen to engage with the kind of diverse spectrum of people, voices, ways of writing, and so on, and to keep my writing out of it as much as possible.
You were saying just now, sorry, about commissions. You commission all your writers, don't you?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of other online stuff, wasn't it the Huffington Post famously wasn't paying any of their writers, and like a lot of other online magazines and newspapers, they didn't pay anybody. And it's a great thing that you're treating it the same way as more traditional press, where the writing is actually worth something and you're paying the people for their time and for their expertise.
Thank you, yeah. I mean, that's how I emerged, right, as a writer. And yeah, I believe, investing in quality commentary. I wish we could publish more frequently. I wish there was greater editorial budget, but, doesn't everyone? But I mean, it wasn't like that initially, I have to say. In the first year or so, a lot of people were doing it for free. And, I'm amazingly appreciative of that effort to help it kind of get it off the floor, up and running, until we sort of attracted advertising, further down the line, getting sponsorship, having a small group of patrons who commit money on an annual basis. And then as the mag grew beyond the magazine, we'd offer awards, workshops, exhibitions, eventually book publishing, and all of that kind of feeds back into the mag. I say the mag is like the flagship, but it's given birth to all these other areas of activity. So the writing, I mean, The Guardian featured 1,000 Words as part of a piece on photography magazines in general. And, they did say Photography 1,000 Words stands out for the quality of its writing, which it was nice to hear.
If I look back and think about it, I think that's, for me, what always set it apart from a lot of what else was happening at the same time. And looking at your list of contributing writers, I think all of them are somewhat figures within the contemporary photography world. Like you've gathered like a lot of experts to contribute to the magazine as well.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I always say I don't think pride's a very productive emotion, but I do take heart from the roster of contributors. people who I was reading, studying, looking up to as a student who are now friends, colleagues of mine and share the same platform. So yeah, we've built that over time. More than 120 writers who I admire greatly and whose expertise and opinion I respect a lot. Yeah, I guess that was pretty much encapsulated in the Writer Conversations book. We released the second in that interview series of small paperbacks. That was to kind of pay homage and acknowledge not just the loyal, long-standing contributors of 1,000 Words, but the many other writers beyond my network and sphere of influence that I read and enjoy. That was a book edited by Duncan Waldridge and Lucy Suter that came out March, April this year in 2023 with a launch at the Photographers Gallery and talk there that we did with one of the contributors as well, Paul Stumani. But that has a brilliant range of voices in, I think, from different territories and geographies and, not just art historians, but anthropologists and media theorists. We had authors in there such as Tina Kampt, David Campany, David Levi-Strauss, through to Christopher Pinney and Joanna Zelinska, Simon Namjay. That was, I guess, the apex of how 1,000 Words has formed this archive that's built of knowledge from culturally diverse worlds, viewpoints and approaches. And it was a moment of meta-thinking and reflection on our own practices and how that connects to and can explore other writers' processes and motivations, many of whom have provided an array of critical commentary that we would have read and have formed quite positive intellectual histories that shape our understanding and appreciation and study of photography today. So that was an amazing project to work on and put out there in the world.
I guess you've done a few books then, or there's a few parts of the online project that have now become, they're in the material space, they're physical, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. It started with Curator Conversations, which was the first in the interview series. That really kicked it off. And that was a response to the pandemic when everything very quickly came to a halt. Exhibition spaces were closed, not just once, but on multiple occasions. That was part of this collaborative set of research activities that I did with two colleagues, one from the London College of Communication, Chris Stewart, and another from the Royal College of Art, both here in London, the UK, Esther Teitman. And that was a symposium at the Photographers Gallery, followed up by a 10-week course I led there on curating, just offering sort of practical and philosophical insights into the world of making exhibitions. And then the follow-up was a collection of interviews. We launched them online. They were weekly during the first UK lockdown. And I spent a lot of time during that period with my neighbour, Sarah Boris, the fabulous artist, art director and designer, who was following the series and suggested, why don't we make a book, a paperback book, something that's printed locally, sustainable, doesn't contain any images, and just archives this moment. And yeah, we ran with it and added, I think, 5 or 6 more interviews that weren't available online. And that seems to have gone down well. We've sold out the first edition earlier this year. We're just putting the finishing touches to the new and expanded edition with another 4 curators contributing to it.
Cool.
But yeah, that was a question of right time, right place, right people. And I think offered some really wonderful and generous insights into key modes of thinking behind a range of curatorial practices that inform many exhibitions people would have hopefully seen, from MoMA to Tate Modern to Pompidou to Zeitz Museum of Contemporary Art in Africa, Instituto Moreira Salles in Sao Paulo, right through to the Shanghai Center for Photography in China. And that was very much set against the COVID-19 backdrop. It was, the interviews were conducted in the first lockdown, produced in the second, released in the third. But the beauty of that thing was, I think, curators had this moment of pause, right? And the world was very reflective. People were looking inward. So there was a lot of critical self-reflexivity to examine the various ways curating mediates our understanding and experience of the photographic image. But also, Black Lives Matter really blew up with the murder of George Floyd and countless other Black men in the States and elsewhere. And as you know, the art world had its moment of reckoning, really. A lot of institutions were forced to look at their own practices and biases, release anti-racism statements, So it was those two factors, those two kind of parallel processes really gave birth to the impetus to do that book. So, we're looking at a lot of fundamental questions, not just about the curator's role and critical context for imagery, but also about notions of ethics, responsibility, care, as well as propositions for decolonization and, through forms of curatorial activism. So that was the thinking that went into the first book in the paperback series. It's followed on by the writing one, and we'll produce another next year, shifting it slightly from the role or the occupation to the field of photo book. So it'll be photo book conversations, not publisher conversations. We'll engage a range of people involved in that environment, not just publishers, but editors, designers, distributors, collectors, dealers, booksellers, and so on. But those, I see them as a kind of set 3-part volume, and they're linked by meditating on the kind of the frameworks for photography, the context, publishing, curating, writing, and so on. And then I have plans to develop that series, further thematic editions, interviewing artists. So yeah, watch this space.
Yeah, the next edition sounds really exciting, actually, because I'm always telling photographers you need to make a book if you really want to kind of grab people's attention, because although there are a lot of people making books, there were fewer people making books than there are trying to get their work exhibited somewhere. And exhibitions are temporary, books are permanent, like you can do a lot more things with them. So I think definitely that will really benefit a lot of people, I guess, for that insight from a lot of different points of view.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the idea. It's the insight and the candid perspectives.
I'm wondering, with the magazine, was there a tipping point, or was there a moment when it went from, I'm just going to try to get my writing out there, try to gather other people's writing? And you did mention about The Guardian featuring it in a piece, but was there a point where you thought, okay, this has gone from something, a passion project, into now it's a serious endeavour?
I mean, it's interesting as it kind of evolved and stuck around. I think persistence is a key.
Because a lot of the others from that period are gone, like most others from the 2000s.
I know. It's a shame. I think
it's really
of the photo magazine graveyard, and there's some amazing publications in there. Ones that I really loved and cherished growing up as a student, such as Portfolio, Photo 8, Next Level, that I would consult, and editors of which I was friends with, and were amazing to me in those early days, giving advice and being supportive. But I guess it was once I moved to London and started attending private views and events, and you got to meet people who are reading and engaging with this material you're putting out there in the world, and to see that sort of appetite and the role it had, potential value it provides. And then as it grew and stuck about, the invitations would come to do portfolio reviews, be on panels, these kind of things. And that just connects you and builds a network. But it was really, I guess, an interesting question. It wasn't until 2014 when I was invited. This is neat dovetailing, really. In 2012, just to backtrack, we were awarded some money from the EU Cultural Programme to offer this mentorship program over 18 months. It involved a series of workshops, mentorship from myself and the other editor. But those workshops took place with partner institutions in Marseille and Seville with different high-profile photographers. They led 4 young European photographers. The idea was they would produce a new body of work, and that was unveiled at Flowers Gallery in London on Kingston Road. Yeah, Chris Littlewood invited me to curate a show there of those projects, 4 projects. And that was an amazing experience. Had incredible press from Washington Post, Huffington Post, Guardian, so on. Brilliant experience working with that gallery, and it's the start of an ongoing great relationships. In fact, we had our 10th anniversary talk and drinks reception there at Flowers. So they've always been close to my heart and close to many people in the community here in London. But it was there that really kind of set me on track to making exhibitions. The following year, I applied for a job at Media Space, which was a project that was a museum within the museum. So it was the Art and Photography Gallery in the Science Museum. The Science Museum has group of 4 museums across the UK. At the time, they had the National Media Museum in Bradford, where the collection was housed, the National Photography Collection, which at the time was the largest in the world. And the Media Space was the largest physical space dedicated to photography in the UK. And that was incredibly intense but formative experience for me during the time I was there. It was a complex project, no longer exists. It was ill-fated in many ways. But for me, it provided amazing insight and experience. I got to work on mid-career touring retrospective of Alex Soth, Gathered Leaves, that brought together his 4 major bodies of work at that time, an accompanying catalogue that was made by Mac, really pushing the envelope of the catalogue. It was reproduced miniature versions of his 4 seminal books, because they were out of print and rare. And then there was a series of postcards behind with an interview with Aaron Schumann. So you could arrange your own exhibition. In many ways, it was an exhibition in a box, a portable exhibition in a box. And that was
I think I remember that one.
Right. It was a clamshell box.
Yeah.
And that went on a tour across Europe to FOMO, I beg your pardon, in Antwerp, Finnish Museum of Photography, Bradford, Dichterhallen, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in Hamburg. Dichterhallen, yeah, beg your pardon. Went on a good tour. So I was working on that, the events and talks program, and then simultaneously working on a collection display of Julia Margaret Cameron, an exhibition I made of Colin Hardin, the former curator of photography and photographic technology at the National Media Museum. These are all people 20, 25 years older than me, been in positions for 30 years. So it was an interesting experience. You can imagine being this young, newbie on the scene in the museum.
Well, even a young writer, really.
Yeah.
Like a young writer.
Yeah. And that was incredible. I thought my specialism and expertise was contemporary photography, but working with that historical material, the Herschel album, was it called? It's what she gave to her friend, Sir John Herschel, who coined the term photography, her great friend and mentor, comprised of 94 images, which she gave to him in 2 parts of amazing luminaries, friends, as well as servants. We made a display of that album, and it was so rich and rewarding, going through all the archives, learning about Julia Margaret Cameron's quite bohemian and eccentric life, the people she rubbed shoulders with, what she was up against as a female photographer, how much she believed in her ability, how much she believed in photography as an art form. That was the first instance of working with 19th century material. So those very 2 different types of exhibitions simultaneously, it was a real baptism of fire in terms of quite large scale, big productions in quite a tricky place, if I can put it like that. But, what I got from there, I got a lot very, very quickly. It kind of went pear-shaped, that project. The collection was given to the V&A, so it's in safe hands just across the road. You may or may not know the V&A and the Science Museum were once one museum, the South Kensington Museum, and then they split into science and arts, which is interesting, the implications of photography, right? The kind of dual identity it's had since its birth. But yeah, they had a lot of the Royal Photographic Collection there now and have a super collection. It's in good hands. But from there, I met some amazing friends and colleagues, one of whom was Greg Hobson. He was, had been a curator at the National Media Museum for 25, going on 30 years. We realized we had a really productive relationship. We worked on a Fox Talbot, the final show at Media Space with Russell Roberts. And then we applied jointly to be the co-artistic directors of the 2nd edition of a festival in Oxford called Photo Oxford. We did 1 edition of that we worked on for 2 years, getting the funding together, getting institutions on board, adequate fit-for-purpose spaces, a lot of work. Commissioned a rebrand of the website logo, and that was delivered in October 2017, and did a lot of work in the UK in that period. And since then, really, I've maintained involvement in the London photo scene through overseeing the discovery section of Photo London the last 2 years. But predominantly, I've worked abroad, and I just love that. I love working across cultures, different people, different discourses, different contexts. And I like that. I like trying to keep my life fluid and dynamic as possible without this mad bottlenecking of deadlines and that can sometimes happen. But that's given me a lot of joy and pleasure working in Italy since 2020 on the fabulous festival there, Fotografia, Europea. So that's taken up a lot of my time and headspace, and in the best possible sense. I've really put a lot into that, and really enjoyed seeing that thrive and grow.
I don't mean to cut you off, but you've gone from thinking about how it sort of started, because I guess you never would have anticipated this in 2008, but going from publishing, writing about photography, which has led into, I think, leading into curatorial projects is logical. I think for us within the scene, it makes sense that the more that you're around photography, someone at some point is eventually going to say, do you want to put a show together? But then doing something like Photo Oxford and then going into doing the festival in Italy, that's a whole nother logistical
Yes.
thing to deal with. How has that been? Because you're one of 3 artistic directors, is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question, Michael. Perhaps I should backtrack a little bit. I've made a small leap. So 2017, Photo Oxford, that happened. The following year was the 10th anniversary of 1,000 Words. I knew I wanted to do a print publication. There was a Kickstarter campaign we ran for that. Mag came out, had a launch party. But
it's sold out, isn't it? You can't get it anymore.
That did sell out, yes. It was quite intensive production. Again, designed by Sarah Boris. Worked with her on all the 1,000 Words stuff. And in that anniversary year, I was approached by Louise Fedotov-Clements, who was then director of Format Festival, founder and director of Format Festival, artistic director at Quad in Derby. She invited me to do an exhibition, the headline exhibition for the 2019 edition of that festival, proposing I did something around the mag. Obviously, I was honoured and delighted. I didn't want it to be too meta. I didn't want to kind of translate what we're doing online into a physical space. I was less interested in that, but I did want to champion a series of artists that have been featured in the mag over the years. It was called Mutable Multiple, featured 6 artists that all had this kind of shared kinship in terms of expanded documentary. That was orbiting my imagination a lot at that time, how new strategies for storytelling beyond quite literal, quote unquote, straightforward approaches. So they may use fiction or trickery or suggestion to deal with kind of quite complex and slippery subjects that require these sort of multiple vantage points. So we did that show. I was also then received an invite to be the guest curator for Photo50 at London Art Fair by the wonderful Sarah Monk. Did a show about family there. Who's Looking at the Family Now? It was a part of a nod to an exhibition that happened 25 years earlier at the Barbican that Val Williams did. I had the catalogue for that, actually, that I was looking at in my Falmouth days. So that made a big impression on me. And I thought it might be interesting to reflect on changing notions of family and new ways of working with photography that might have happened during that time. So it was a really busy...
Did Val see the show?
She did, yeah. And she put it up on her Instagram, seemed to quite like that kind of, that nod to it. And, as it happens, there's a really curious link. So my family show harks back to Val's family show at the Barbican. And then a friend and colleague had seen that Photo50 show, Who's Looking at the Family Now. It was in the kind of genesis stage of doing a show about masculinity. And she invited me to be one of the adjunct curators with a few others, Echo Eschen, Jonathan D. Katz, to get involved in that project. And that was a really, really major exhibition I had the chance to work on. Opened at the Barbican in February 2020, featured 50 international artists from Peter Hujar to Catherine Opie to Sunil Gupta to Richard Avedon, as well as a few younger names like Palomnel Roach and Richard Moss at the time. 300 works across both floors of a catalogue, 6 sections looking at power, patriarchy, family, fatherhood, disrupting the archetype, reclaiming the black body, the queer gaze, the female perspective. All of those sections could have been a huge show in their own right, and indeed have been since. And that toured again to FOMU, the Luma, Arles, had a lot of tremendous press from Crease, the New York Times. Had to close due to the pandemic, had 2 weeks open again in July or August of that year, and then went on its tour. And it really felt like it kind of tapped into a zeitgeist. We were seeing increasing column inches and terms like toxic masculinity, fragile masculinity banded about quite a lot at that moment. So it was responding to that kind of cultural conversation. And then during the pandemic, I received a letter from newly appointed Minister of Culture that I thought it was spam. I nearly deleted it. That's never happened to me before. It's a one-line email. Tim, we would like you to join and be the curator of this festival. Please see attached. And then the beautiful, wonderfully worded letter from Annalisa Rabiti, who's a assessora for Reggio Emilia. Great individual, amazing values, as do all of my colleagues and the people of that region, Reggio Emilia and Emilia Romagna. It's very wealthy, it's very socialist, so they invest, and it's famous for the Reggio Emilia approach, which is learning through play and experimentation. They not only champion education, but also champion culture. And this festival, Fotografia Europea, is the biggest thing in that town there. It happens on an annual basis, runs from the end of April to early June. The main hub is the Chiostri di San Pietro. It's a 15th century vast, sprawling monastic complex that had been converted by architects in 2017. I should mention that the festival has been running since 2007. So that's the main hub there, as well as other museums, spaces, libraries across Reggio Emilia, and then beyond in the region, such as Mast in Bologna. And I received this beautifully worded letter inviting me to take part, to join Walter Guadagnini, who's the curator there, is involved. He's the director of Camera in Torino, and join him and Diane Dufour, director of Lebart in Paris, fabulous space, as the three artistic directors to work on that edition. But yeah, the letter was very specific. It's we want to invite you in to inject it with diversity of voices, new ideas, and internationalize it. So I think that was what they're thinking, and that's what we've done. I've kind of taken up that challenge, is to introduce a lot of new names to Italy that are exhibiting there for the first time over the years. We've shown Carmen Winnat, Hoda Afshar. But yeah, just going, so the main hub is the Chiostri di San Pietro. You can do 11 shows there, 10 upstairs, very large scale rooms. And then we tend to do a bigger monographic or retrospective / historical / mid 20th century show in the ground floor, which is fully fit for purpose, palazzo type space, has 8 rooms, generally tend to be guest curated. So you have maybe 10, 11 shows there, and then another 10 across the town that partner institutions are responsible for. Diane, Walter, and I did the first edition. Walter and I did the second, the two of us. And then this year, we invited Luce Lebart, the historian, curator, researcher at the Archive of Modern Conflict, to join us. And again, that's fabulous to have these 3 voices, slightly different positions, interests. Luce is based in Paris, Walter's between Torino and Bologna. I'm here in London. So, thinking about shared interest, the crossovers, also the dissonances as well. Very different scenes, different discourses and debates exist between those places. And yeah, I think it's beneficial it's certainly very unique and distinct for the festival to have those 3 artistic directors. I don't know case of that elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Because how do you guys come up with the concept then when you're piecing it together? Because I guess for a festival, it's quite different than, I suppose, when you go to art fairs. Just thinking about the 2 main spaces where you can go and see a lot of photography in one space.
Yeah.
You can often see what's happening in the market, what galleries are presenting and what things are trending. But a festival, you're often reacting to the times, or you're kind of trying to tap into the zeitgeist. Like, how is it for you guys? Particularly that you're in different countries, like you're bringing different cultural backgrounds and other different perspectives to it, and then meeting together to determine, I guess, what the theme of the festival will be.
I mean, it's a great question. I'm a believer in that curators should model the times. We should sort of reflect the spirit of the moment, draw upon sort of the most pressing socio-political, environmental issues. And we did that this year. The theme was Europe. The title was Europe Matters. So there's that kind of double meaning there, the question of Europe, but also like the importance of it, of a sense of community and togetherness. But then the subtitle was Visions of a Restless Identity. So we're looking at some of the challenges and circumstances European citizens face today, but also thinking how Europe is not just for Europeans. So drawing on the diaspora, migrant experience as well. But it's born from the board of directors across the foundation that deliver it and the municipality. There's a director there, and they suggest topics, and then we kind of interpret it, give it shape, structure, and work that way. And yet it is a challenge and exciting, given that the 3 of us have different backgrounds, experiences, interests, to come up with a group of artists that we feel say important and exciting things about the state of the medium, but then also address the topics in rigorous and fresh ways. And then also with an eye to kind of curatorial responsibility, representation, inclusivity, and so on. It's a lot of ducks to line up, but that's the challenge of the work. Yeah, I'd encourage everybody to visit that town. It's a huge condensation point for photography in Italy, and either measuring success in 2022, we were named Photography Festival of the Year at the prestigious Lucy Awards. 2023 edition had a 20% increase in attendance and ticket sales. So those kind of external metrics point to it's going in the right direction. For me, it's about the collaboration, the people it connects me to, the relationships that I strike up that stay with me. That's how I measure success. And for me, the festival is, my most favorite context to work in, to curating. I like to do these large scale group thematic shows because that's what drives me, fulfills me most as a curator, is about mapping relationships, articulating connections between practices and schools and approaches. That's where you feel fully unleashed as a curator, I think. You mentioned about art fairs there. They have their place. Super looking forward to Paris Photo. I've also been working the last 2 years, like I mentioned, on overseeing the discovery section of Photo London. Initially, I was appointed as a curator. Then it changed to curatorial advisor, now an ambassador. And I don't want to be rude to anyone, but I don't think you really curate in an art fair. It's, the late, great Okwait Wezor said that you can't curate in an art fair because you can't act socially or politically in that space. And for me, it's more about being a champion, dedicated champion to that section, make sure the gallery is being seen and heard, bringing collectors, visitors through, liaising with the press, giving it some coverage in the magazine. That's where you see the new emergent voices and different directions the medium's departed in, I think, in that area of the fair. But yeah, it's a very, very different exercise than, say, staging a large-scale festival. You use the word logistics, which is the least sexy aspect of curating. Logistics admin is a huge part, very consuming. Good thing about Italy, they have a tremendous team, a lot of resources. So that's kind of taken care of at their end on the ground. And we can focus specifically on the content and the interpretation. So yeah, I've always, as you probably gathered, moved between different contexts, size of organizations, different frequencies, and get a lot from that, from mixing and moving with various groups of people and sizes of projects. That I find that really exciting and keeps me fresh, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess coming full circle then back to the magazine, you mentioned the festival in 2024. In 2024, the magazine is celebrating its 15th anniversary. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. 15 years.
And you're doing another publication to coincide with 15 years of 1,000 words.
That's right, exactly. Well, just like the 10th anniversary, we'll put together a special anniversary edition, probably 250-page print publication, something I refer to as like a bookish magazine. Perhaps there's a bit more legacy and weight to it. Yeah, just to celebrate that milestone, really. 15 years is, as I always say, is light years in internet time. So we'll bring that out, be at the heart of it, a series of portfolios and newly commissioned writing. There'll be a section on festival guides. At the back, we'll have a small archive component of the most talked about and debated and read articles in the last 5 years. At the front, there'll be more editorial features focusing on, when the Photo Museum Winter Tour reopens in just outside Zurich in 2025, what the director's plans are, right through to asking publishers what's on their bookshelf, obituaries, all those kind of editorialized type features at the beginning. Sarah Boris will design it again. Have a launch in London next year, hopefully a lounge. It's always good to connect to readers face to face, and they can connect to each other, study, relax, so on in a lounge. That's what we're building up to. Hopefully we'll have cracked the international distribution by then so we can get it out going globally. Obviously we sell it off our site and it reaches far-flung places from New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, Russia, Brazil. But at that point, following a lot of conversations and meetings I'm having at the moment, hopefully we'll have various distributors set up in other territories so readers don't have to fork out a lot for shipping. So that's also something to be mindful of. But yeah, a lot happening. The festival, mag, the third in the 3-part volume of the conversation series, all the other projects, talks, teaching as well. But yeah, that's me. That's my life.
You're a busy man, Tim. You mentioned that you were doing I think you had a Kickstarter for the 10th one, and I think you mentioned it for this as well. So what incentives are you providing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It runs for 30 days. It's all or nothing. I'm not sure if you've ever run one or your readers will have.
Years and years ago.
Okay. It's quite a nerve-wracking process. offer a series of incentives, from maybe a PDF to the print mag to a bundle of print mag, poster, other merchandise like a tote bag, through to prints that are being offered by featured photographers, through to kind of one-to-one portfolio reviews that I offer. So a range of different incentives. It requires quite a bit of marketing and people sharing and putting it out there. But I probably only just recovered from the previous one 5 years ago, to be honest. But yeah, ready to go again. And it was amazing to see the response and uptake. Last time we raised £27,000 in 30 days. And it just showed how invested and loyal the 1,000 Words readership is, and something I never take for granted. And we'll throw a good launch party, and I like meeting the people who engage and keep the mag going, keep reading it. So that's all to come. That's in the pipeline.
Well, we're running out of time, but before you go, you see obviously a lot of photography, probably more than a lot of people considering all of your different roles. A lot of younger photographers, and let's say emerging or mid-career photographers, listen to the podcast. As somebody that does see a lot of work and obviously promotes a lot of work through the magazine, selects work in different curatorial exhibitions, and also is now involved with different festivals, what advice would you give to photographers who have done a bit of stuff, but they just can't quite get their work out there?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking about this a lot at the moment, trying to set up prizes as well around the 15th anniversary, speaking with some sponsors. There's just so much great work that needs to be seen and shared. Myself and a whole host of other individuals and organizations are trying to platform and champion new and diverse practices, whether that's artists or writers. Really just want to see all these amazing creative practitioners enjoy the fruits of their authorship, and to bring in new ideas and narratives that perhaps aren't being told enough. So I wish there were more platforms to get seen, more opportunities on offer, less barriers to entry. But really, I'd say for photographers and artists, early, mid-career stage, it's about persistence, sticking with it, continue making for yourself, as a means of feeling alive and moving through the world as a creative individual. But keep making, keep connecting. I think strong work does inevitably and eventually boil up, and connect to others, build a community, get to portfolio review events, but do your research on those specifically, who's attending them, their specialism, their interests. If you're seeing a gallerist, think about who they have in their roster of artists. Does your work fit? Same applies if you're seeing publishers, so on and so forth. So portfolio reviews are a great avenue, many of which are paid for better or worse, and some are more beneficial than others, but certainly you have the ones in Format, in Derby, Arles, in France, the sort of main ones. Every time I've done those, I've met amazing people, kept in touch with artists, or referred them to other colleagues who I know are working on such and such a project, and their work may be suitable for it. And then down the line, I've been approached or working on something, and I pull it out from my research folders. Oh, I remember I met them there, this fits. So it's that kind of marathon idea rather than sprint. It does require a bit of a long haul attitude. So there's that. Yeah, attending portfolio reviews, festivals, openings, and then approaching, sending, there's a lot of open calls. There's a lot of editors and curators that are very open and generous, and obviously it's in their interest to find and discover new work. So get in touch with them. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want, type thing. Stick at it. And don't be discouraged through rejection. We all have to experience it, right through from artists, curators, museum directors. Everybody has to learn to deal with quote unquote failure. That's where growth can emerge from. And enjoy the process, enjoy what you do.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having a chat, Tim. It's good to learn a bit more about what you do. Yeah, really appreciate it, actually, because it's incredible what you've done. I think the magazine, I've always really looked up to it and sort of as a resource whenever I need to find information or discover new artists or learn more about certain people that are in the field. I think 1,000 Words is always a great place to get high quality information. So thanks for creating this magazine. Congrats on 15 years. And I hope it keeps going.
Thank you, Michael. That's very kind. And thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. See you soon on the festival fair circuit.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Tim Clark. Please be sure to sign up for the 1000 Words mailing list for details of the 15th anniversary celebrations, links to which I've included in the show notes. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Subtext and Discourse Art World Podcast wherever you consume your podcasts, or go on Better and leave a rating and review of the show. Sharing with your friends who would also find this interesting helps promote the people I interview and the projects that they're involved with. You can also find me on social media. These days I'm most active on Threads. Just check my link in bio in the show notes. Oh, and let me know what you think of the new music. I'm going through something of a rebrand of the podcast at the moment, so I'm curious to know what you think. That's all for now. Thanks again for tuning in. My name's Michael Dooney, and you've been listening to Subtext and Discourse.